Hello and welcome. I'm Waxing Philosophical, and I would love to help you become so as well. If you're new to the channel, please like and subscribe. It really helps me out and helps the channel grow. If you're returning, you probably will recall from the last video that we spent some time laying the groundwork for knowledge, what it is, what it means, and started to play with some of the ideas of how to think about knowledge. I would like to make a distinction between knowledge, as I've been using it, and epistemology, which I have been using interchangeably. Now I want to throw a monkey wrench in that and split these two apart, because epistemology isn't human knowledge. Epistemology is the study of human knowledge. So what we would consider human knowledge is that which we know. The study of, epistemology is concerned with how we know that and would include that which we do not yet know. To say only a little bit of what it means, in addition, above and beyond knowledge. Today, we're going to talk a lot more about knowledge in general. We're going to get a little bit more specific about epistemology. We're going to dive into some of the ancient ideas about what it is and what it means. And we're going to take those ideas and bring them into the modern day so that we can make sense of them with the decisions that we make on our everyday lives. But I think that without further ado, we should just dig right in. So, as I had just mentioned, the study of knowledge, epistemology, is different than knowledge itself. So, epistemology is going to be concerned with that which can be known, that which we know, and how we come to know it. So, there's a few ways that we can think about knowledge, what it is and what it means. We've talked about a few of them briefly, scratched the surface on some of the basic ideas on how to think about it. But I would like to introduce a little bit more formal ideas by talking about Plato's conception of it, as is illustrated in the Theaetetus. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull up our outline. Oh, that's a blank outline. That's not going to be very helpful. Let's try that again. So, in our previous video, we had discussed axioms, essence, apprehension, constitution, and categorical truths is where we are going to end. That's still the case, though I'm going to change this up a little bit with regard to where we are going, because I had hoped that I would be able to start talking about a priori synthetic knowledge and developing the groundwork for what is categorical truth. But I think it would be more fun and more interesting to spend a little bit more time talking about some of the other things. So for today, what we are going to dive into is going to be this list here, right? So we're going to begin with doxa, gnosis, and episteme. And these are Plato's ideas, again, from the Theaetetus. We're going to talk about truth evaluation. We're going to talk about the difference between opinion and fact. We're going to talk about the difference between subjectivity and objectivity. And this is all going to lead to paradox, which is going to be the thing that I want to talk about specifically in my next video. I'll probably introduce some of Zeno's paradoxes. It's a common mistake that people think there's just one. There's a bunch of them. They're all really fun to talk about. We'll hint at some of them today, I would imagine. But let's get started with the top. Doxa, gnosis, and episteme. It's not really important that you memorize these words, or that you remember that they're Plato's ideas, or they come from the Theaetetus. It's especially not important because Plato didn't invent these words. He was hoping to make more clear some of the language that was common in his day. So put these to actual definitions as best he could. And we're going to talk about those definitions, how they're different, and the ideas are what's important. Again, that you remember the difference between doxa and episteme means less than that you understand the concepts. So I think that doxa is the best place to start. A good way to think about doxa is a common knowledge, or popular opinion might be a good way to say it, but it's not something that we would consider to be unreliable. I think that's a good way to phrase it, because it is meaningful, right? So if you've heard the adage, watched pot never boils, this is factually not true. It will eventually, we know, because science, right? But it does tell us something else about our attention, and when we live in anticipation, the relative time seems to drag out. So there's something meaningful in this, and this is the idea of doxa. But there's something more to it too that is also factually true. But let's compare this with gnosis. Gnosis is what one experiences firsthand. So it's what I have had experience with directly with my immediate interaction with the world, or so far as it can be immediate. That's going to be a complication that we'll talk about later. Our immediate access to objective reality. But we're not there yet. So I have experiences of the world. For example, if I'm watching a pot boil and I accidentally touch the burner, it's hot. That's something I've experienced firsthand. I don't need to rely on somebody to tell me, hey, the stove is hot. I know from firsthand experience, from my Gnostic experience of it. But I haven't experienced the Eiffel Tower. I've never been to France. So how do I know such a thing exists if I have not had first-hand experience? Well, I know through doxa, right? It's public knowledge or common knowledge. I've seen it in photographs. I've seen it in movies. I've talked to people that have been there, have taken pictures in front of it, have walked up it. And so these are factual bits of information that I use to collect this body of knowledge that I accept as being true. I've never been to the Eiffel Tower. I don't have Gnostic experience of it, but I still have a good reason to believe that there is a tower in France called the Eiffel Tower that looks like the Eiffel Tower, right? And I have good reason to believe it on doxa. Now, doxa isn't always reliable because we can't always trust the experiences of others, but we can't always trust our own experiences either. This is going to be something that will come back up when we get more deeply into Descartes' skepticism, that we have reason to be skeptical of even our own Gnostic experiences. But let's shelve that issue for the time being and talk about instead episteme. Episteme is a little bit more, well, I would say a lot bit more methodical. So episteme is kind of what we would consider early precursors to science. It's something that is demonstrable, it's something that's teachable, it's something that's factually verifiable. It's something that has some concreteness to it. Above and beyond merely my experience of it, and it's not something that we believe by custom or by tradition in the way that some of our history is handed down, in the way that our language is handed down. This is, we take language for granted, but language is a form of doxa, right? It's been given to us. It's common knowledge, and we use it and mold it and change it to fit our modern day conceptions. And the study of this would be linguistics, right? Which is an episteme from this conception. It's a form of episteme. It's a systematic examination where we study, we verify, we test, and we demonstrate, and we teach in all of these ways what language is today, where it came from, and trace back its history. So we have these three different ways of knowing stuff, and all of them are really quite valuable, and none of them should be discounted. But how do we know that these experiences are true, or that common knowledge is true, or that we can trust science? Well, what we would look to is this method of truth evaluation. The process of truth evaluation is very obvious, should be, but there's some nuance here that might not be obvious. Let's look at some examples. Let's take, for example, this declarative statement. 2 plus 2 equals 5. This is a false statement. There's not really any mistake, I hope, about the fact that 2 plus 2 equals 4 and not 5. So we would evaluate this statement as a false statement, as opposed to a true statement. So let's consider something that's a little less obvious. It's raining outside right now. This is a truth evaluable statement. But for me to verify this, I would have to get up, walk over to the window, and look outside to see that it is or is not raining outside. And the truth value of this is going to depend on whether it is actually raining outside. So, and to add to this complication, wherever you are, at whatever time you are watching this, the truth value of this will depend on your relative location. So it is a truth evaluable statement in the same way that 2 plus 2 equals 5, right? But it does have a less consistent nature because it depends on a relative subject, you or me or whoever the reader is, whoever the one is that's trying to evaluate whether the statement is true or false. We also have statements like this: cats are better than dogs. Now, before you have any emotional reaction, which is probably your immediate response, like absolutely or absolutely not, before you influence your analysis of the truth evaluableness of this statement, before we imprint our emotions onto the statement, let's think about the statement itself critically. Cats are better than dogs. In what way? Right? By what criteria are we going to judge this? This is problematic, right? Because if we're talking about herding sheep, I've never seen a cat herd sheep. I suspect it would be possible for a cat to do so, but traditionally we use dogs for that kind of that kind of function. But something else to complicate this: should we evaluate the value of cats and dogs by their usefulness to us? And what I'm alluding to is the idea of value theory, which is something that I would like to do a whole, at least a whole video, if not a whole bunch of videos, on value theory, because it's fascinating and how we think about it. Right? On the face of it, without consideration for whether we consider dogs and cats as instrumental to us, valuable to our ends, we should consider them as valuable in themselves. They're intrinsically valuable. I would argue, I would posit that we should consider them intrinsically valuable and not evaluate them simply on their usefulness to us. When we look at it this way, this is not really a truth or valuable statement. Now, you might have an opinion as to whether cats are better than dogs, but I believe this is not actually a truth or valuable statement. Whether or not it's true for you might be a matter of opinion. It depends on what you want to use dogs and cats for, or it depends on how you decide you are going to evaluate the usefulness or the valuableness of cats and dogs. But I'm not willing to make any of those kinds of commitments. I think that cats and dogs should be considered valuable in themselves, intrinsically valuable, and not something that should be weighed against each other. Right? So I'm going to say this is not a truth or valuable statement. But that might be my opinion. And if you have a different opinion, you should absolutely let me know. So with that out of the way, let's move on to this idea of fact versus opinion. Because this is a difficult thing that does depend on subjectivity. So we're going to have to deal with both of these issues, fact and opinion, and subjectivity and objectivity, kind of together, right? So if several people all walk into a room, the only thing that's in the room is one table. All the people might agree that there is a table in the room. This would be a kind of objective viewpoint, right? This is kind of what correspondence theory is based on. Any philosophers who are watching out there who are familiar with correspondence theory, I can feel you cringing. We're not there yet. We'll talk about that. But we have this idea that there is an objectiveness to reality. We can all walk into a room and agree that there is a table in that room. Whether it's a good table or a bad table, whether it's a lighter color or a darker color, these things are going to depend on our relative viewpoint. It depends on how much light is in the room. It depends on whether I have brought my glasses and am wearing my glasses. It's going to depend on whether I think that tables are cool or useful, or maybe I consider this to be more of a countertop. What's the difference between tabletop and a countertop, right? This is going to be something that is not only subjective, it is relative to my subjective viewpoint. I am a subject, I have a viewpoint, that viewpoint is subjective, right? As opposed to an objective viewpoint. An objective viewpoint is not from the viewpoint of a subject, which is kind of problematic because we don't know what that would look like. But we'll talk more about the impossibility of objectively true statements later. For the time being, we're worried about what is verifiably true, what is verifiably false, or what cannot be considered truth or valuable. Right, so these are the different ways that we're talking about knowledge just today. So if it is the case that I'm not sure whether I consider this more of a table or more of a countertop, this might be informed by my experiences, my past, by my traditions, or the traditions which have been given to me through doxa, right? This is going to keep rearing its head back up as we're trying to have these discussions about what is true, what is valuable. Doxa is not ever going to go away. We talk about it in a lot of different ways. We call it different words. But it always is kind of the same thing. We have these traditions of truth and value that I talked about last week. These traditions which are handed to us in a lot of cases, the traditions of how we view the world are going to determine how we view the world, right? They're going to determine whether we consider this to be a tabletop, a countertop, a desktop, or just some flat surface, right? And that's going to depend on what you want to use it for, the kinds of flat surfaces you have been exposed to in the past, what other people in your culture have referred to it as. These things are doxa, and they matter an awful lot. We assume that we have this firm grasp on knowledge, that we have this surefire way to tell what is true, what is real, what is right. But a lot of the things that we are basing, a lot of the axioms, going back to last week too, a lot of the axioms upon which we are building our knowledge about the world aren't challenged. We never take the time to consider whether we believe that these are absolutely, without a doubt, verifiably, demonstrably, scientifically proven to be true. We just use them as axioms because everybody else in our past has traditionally done so. They have asserted these are the axioms of truth and value. This is a good table. Well, I don't know that I want to accept that. I don't know that I'm willing to accept your definition of good. That's a very complex issue. What's good for you might not be good for me, right? This is a whole different idea, which is going to open up the world of axiology, which is, again, alluding to value theory that we'll talk about later. But I'll probably do a simple video of axiology first before I go into the grand details of value theory in general. But we'll see what you guys think when you get back to me. Make comments or chat with me IRL. We'll see where we go from there. So what I want to do is frame with these ideas, frame the tools with which we will construct the idea of paradox versus what is absolutely verifiably true, because this is going to be the best litmus test for how we figure out what is verifiably true. Because if it turns out that some of our ideas that we think are true are built on axioms which are not defensible, we might have accepted a paradox as the foundation for our knowledge. And if this is the case, all of that knowledge is suspect. So we'll talk more about this. Let me know what you think. Be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already. And I look forward to hearing your feedback. Have an excellent day.